Peace and salam. We are watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, on Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Roku, and a whole lot of social media. But we're always there 24/7 on all these mediums, including our website, muslimnetwork.tv. This is the only Muslim television in North America. We're about 6 million Muslims here, and there were no medium of communication with them or with neighbors. So it's sort of a public affairs program, and that's what our television is all about. Well, there is some children programming and entertainment as well. Every day as I work from home, I look outside and this postal person comes in. She or he delivers mail all the time. I look forward to it. After that person is gone, we go and get our mail. And I see them without any gloves, without any mask, and hence concern. I mean, they're essential workers. They're doing it day in and day out, and they have no protective equipment with them. And so they are essential workers, except these essential workers are not quite protected. So during the pandemic, that is. And it has a lot of people. 500,000 American work in the Postal Service. Is the second largest civilian employer. Of course, the Walmart is number one, but Walmart gives peanuts and doesn't take care of its people. But these are government employees, and they do a lot of work. 500 million pieces of mail on an average day are delivered. They're part of our society, and while politicians rank at the bottom of the profession people like, well, a little bit around. I think media is a little before or lower in terms of what people respect. But Postal Service, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, it is respected by 91% of all Americans. So how come with such a great approval rating, Postal Service has become controversial for some reason? It has become a partisan issue. People are fighting over it. And to figure out what's happening to our Postal Service and what is the story behind, and what is the story in the newspapers about elections and all that, and how Postal Service became at the mercy of the politician, while it has the better approval rating, way better than any politicians out there. So Lisa Graves have done a marvelous job researching that. And welcome to Muslim Network TV, Lisa.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on.
Thank you. Lisa Graves is the executive director of True North Research and its editor-in-chief. She has served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Policy at the U.S. Department of Justice during the Clinton administration. So tell me first, 91% of approval rating, according to Pew Research, and it is not an old research. It was released just April 9th this year. So how come Postal Service is this popular?
Well, I think that it's perhaps the most democratic institution in America because it serves everyone equally, no matter how small the town is you live in or how big the city is. You have this service where your mail is delivered 6 days a week, and your packages, your medicines, your checks, your ballots, if you request absentee ballot in your state, and that's allowed. And so people, really rely on the Postal Service. It's been around since the beginning of the United States. It was mentioned for the creation of it in the United States Constitution, including the creation of postal roads to make sure that people can get delivery, universal mail delivery. And it provides a tremendous service for its cost. And so it has not been a controversial agency, and it has not been a partisan agency or really targeted in this way until recently.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of history about it. What was it? The Pony Express will deliver mail and all that?
It's delivered mail through basically all sorts of technological change in America, and from the beginning on horseback and still on foot, to these modern times where, with a population of more than 300 million people in the United States, there are hundreds of millions of pieces of mail every single day, and that mail has to be processed every day, otherwise it'll accumulate, and accumulate again and again and again. And so the Postal Service works diligently. And as you mentioned, Iman, it has more than 500,000 workers in the United States, and one of the most diverse workforces in America. In some cities like Chicago, more than 70% of the letter carriers and workers are people of color. And so it has provided a really important ladder for people to move into the middle class, to raise their economic status, to send their kids to college, to have this opportunity to be part of the mail service in America, which really was a flagship and has been a flagship service across the world, an example of how you can have this universal protection and process for everyone.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And it is part of sort of Americana, and it's part of what America is. I would, there used to be, whole mail order catalog business, whole Sears, and all these things came into being. All these private corporation and money-making entities, they benefited from this access. And I was looking at it, there used to be some mail order brides also, for God's sake. So
True.
there is so much of history connected with post office, and it has helped America grow. It grew with it, as you're saying, with technology. But this diversity point which you made, Chicago has, for example, 70% of people of color in the postal service. That probably reflects the city itself. But overall in the country, what is the state of diversity when it comes to the postal service?
I'm not sure what the total number is across the entire workforce, but it is described often as the most diverse workforce in America. And as you mentioned, in terms of Chicago, the fact is that that is more represented in the city. Often, big corporations don't really reflect the racial diversity in their cities. Some corporations are more diverse than others. Some companies are more diverse than others. But the Postal Service really provides opportunities for everyone, no matter their race or background. And it really is an important part of the American workforce. It also employs more than 100,000 U.S. veterans. And so it has that diversity, and it has a lot of women who work in that workforce. And so it's diverse, and it's diverse throughout its management layers. Unfortunately, right now, the board of governors of the U.S. Postal Service is not diverse. It does not reflect the diversity of America by race or religion or gender, and it does not reflect the diversity of the workforce of the Postal Service.
So is it, at the era where nationalism, white nationalism, and militias and FBI and all consider that, it's sort of a number one terrorist threat to America are these nationalist militias and all that. So do you think part of the attacks on post office are motivated because it's the whole diversity of the post office workforce?
I'm not sure that that's why, although we certainly have an enormous problem in this country with the violence from right-wing, white supremacist extremism. And it is certainly the case that we've seen a lot more of that, those groups on the rise, on the march, in essence, like in Charlottesville, and in some cases treated with basically kid gloves by the police, while we've seen diverse protests unfortunately attacked by some officers in different cities, or even, as we saw in our nation's capital, this awful crackdown on the peaceful protests across from the White House in order for President Trump to have a photo op that was well documented what happened there. I don't think that it's necessarily an attack on the diversity of the Postal Service. I think the attack is really sort of threefold. One part of that is this longstanding desire of a billionaire and his allies to privatize the Postal Service. Another part of that is the sort of greed or desire of some companies and politicians to aid that effort for their own personal gain or for the gain of their funders. And then there's this very stark political motivation by this president, and it appears by the men that have been put in charge of the Postal Service, both the Postmaster General and the President of the Board of Governors.
So staying a little bit more on the diversity issue, so you don't find any evidence as a researcher that the diversity was an issue in there. But tell me this. What I have read, correct me if I'm wrong, that 50% of Postal Service employees are women. I mean, I don't know any federal government department or any business out there which is as diverse as that. How many women serve on the board?
None. No women serve on the Board of Governors.
Well, so if they don't intend to go against women, there's no voice out there.
Well, that's right, and I think a related piece we've seen this effort by the Charles Koch's groups. This is a billionaire in the United States, one of the richest billionaire in the world. We've seen his groups attack unionized workforces, try to defund them, try to make it harder for unions to work, and we know that. In many unions, including the Postal Service unions, women do represent the majority of those workers. We see that in the teachers' unions and other unions. Not all unions have a majority of women, but many of them do. So many of these unionized workforces provide opportunities for women, as well as women and men of color, in ways that some of the private sector companies don't, despite their diversity policies. And so I think I take your point. I think it's not an accident, in essence, that workforces that are so diverse have been targeted to disempower. And that's what would happen in many ways if the Postal Service were privatized. These workers would likely lose their ability to unionize or unionize effectively, and lose their benefits, and they're including higher wages that have really helped give people of a wide variety of backgrounds economic opportunities that they might not otherwise have.
So let's talk about this Koch brothers, or one of them who is still alive. What is their interest? Is it some type of ideological thing for them, or is it they have a profit interest in there?
Well, it's certainly ideological, although in some ways that's, I think, an understatement in a way. We don't know his true investments; they're secret. We don't know all of the entities he's invested in, and so there certainly could be investments that would benefit.
Wait a minute. So we know everything about post office. It is open.
We know, yes.
Party which is attacking, we don't know what their investment interests are and things like that. So they're not public company. Everything is private.
That's correct. Charles Koch is one of the richest men in America, and he's one of the richest men in the world. And he runs one of the largest privately held companies in the world. It's not traded on Wall Street. Its financial documents are not presented to the public. There's been some family litigation historically, and in that litigation, his brothers accused him of using the wealth of the corporation to advance his ideological agenda, using corporate funds to support his objectives, his personal objectives. But in terms of his personal objectives, I think it really is important to understand that even though Mr. Koch, wears a tie and a suit and looks like a businessman, he really represents a pretty radical, I would say, reactionary ideology, and it's one that I know that people who adopted it in the 1960s described as a sort of anarcho-capitalism. That was the term used for this place he studied called the, quote, Freedom School. He studied under a man named Robert Lefebvre. And Robert Lefebvre described himself not as an anarchist, but as a sort of an autarch. And to just break that terminology down a bit, the vision of that school was that government should do nothing that corporations could do, and that the role of government was basically to protect private property. And Charles Koch has advanced that ideology in a lot of ways. In the 1970s, he wrote a number of pieces really attacking the way the US government worked and really attacking the notion of the United States government providing services that he thought should be provided by the, quote, free market, how he described it. And these were attacks on traditional institutions like public schools in America. Starting in the 1970s, he began funding people, really staking them, who were attacking the idea of the notion of the public, what the government does on behalf of us as a democracy, what we choose to do as a democracy. And there was more to that story, but Nancy MacLean, in her book Democracy in Chains, really put her finger on it. This ideology often describes itself as being about limited government. But what limited government is a mask for is limited democracy. So what it attempts to do is limit our ability as a democracy to create policies that benefit all of us, and limit our ability as a democracy to regulate and restrain corporations like Charles Koch's corporation. But back in the early 1970s, one of the things that he was staking was entities that were working to abolish the United States Postal Service.
So it is connected to ideology. And would you say that it is the right of the general libertarianism?
Well, it has been described as libertarianism. That's what they call the philosophy. I call it a theory. He became the biggest funder of the Libertarian Party, and the Libertarian Party in 1976 adopted as one of its planks expressly the abolition of the U.S. Postal Service. And then when Charles Koch's brother, David Koch, ran for vice president in 1980 against Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, that was one of the planks of the Libertarian Party. When they lost that vote, where they garnered less than 1% of the vote, basically Charles Koch began focusing more on the Republican Party and influencing the Republican Party. And so in the Reagan administration, he was able to use his people basically to push for a commission on privatization. He got his right-hand man was assigned that commission, and they issued their recommendations in 1988 that included privatizing the Postal Service. And along that same time, they also brought on board one of the chief architects of the Ronald Reagan administration, a guy named James Miller.
Okay, let's talk about it, because in your research, you give amazing connection that how an individual puts money and essentially uses another agent who creates the whole havoc. So let's take a short break. You're watching Muslim Network TV. We'll be right back after these messages.
What was it like when you started this network out, when you started Sound Vision those many years ago?
After 9/11, one lady called me and she says, what is your channel which I can watch? And I say, I'm sorry, we don't have a channel. And you know what she said? She said, then how America will know about you?
SubhanAllah. Anything you want to say to the people who are watching? We had one sister who messaged that she grew up on Sound Vision. What do you say to the people who have been long supporters?
Thank you. Thank you. It is because of you we are able to do all of that. So the generation of Adam's world, you need to take it over for the next generation. And that's my invitation to you. So keep telling everybody where to watch. They can watch it on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, or easy thing, muslimnetwork.tv, or our YouTube channel, or our Facebook channel. And with your help, inshallah, ladies, the one who called me, what channel should I watch Muslims on? Answer is here and now.
Assalamu alaikum. Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's world. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. You're watching Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, Apple TV, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Lisa Graves about the U.S. Postal Service. So before the break, we were talking about how individual effect, but before we go to that conversation a little deeper, your research also determines that the US Postal Service was profitable until a certain time, and it has 20 billion in savings. It has declaring a profit of $1 billion. And tell us a little bit about that. So what was the successful operation it was?
Yes, so the Postmaster General, who had been in charge of the Postal Service in the 1990s into the early 2000s, had really done a lot to modernize the Postal Service processes. And by 2004, 2005, the Postal Service had nearly $1 billion in net revenue. Because it's a government agency, it doesn't have profit, but it has net revenue, revenue that exceeded its expenses that year.
Excess revenue, that is.
And it also had a reserve based on money that had been paid into a separate fund of nearly $20 billion. So it was doing quite well, even with the advent of email and people, using email for communication. A lot of communication still occurs by mail then and now. But what was happening behind the scenes was that the Postal Service, within the Bush administration, had a new Postmaster General then. It's a different person than the person now. And it was embracing this Charles Koch call to privatize. And
okay, so let's go a little bit. Sorry for interruption.
Sure.
I'm just trying to get in my train of thoughts. So here was a profitable institution, and it was modernized to keep up with the technology. Of course, they dispose of all the horses before they're roaming around in somewhere in America, but they were modernized and they were making a profit. But way before that, there is a person, Charles Koch, who started coaching America on privatization and adopted as a party agenda not only ideology but a clear target of the post office. So give us a little bit. I know your infographics is very helpful to understand that, but give us a progression of how one person was able to take that to the level that he has a head of the post office, his person essentially.
Well, it is quite extraordinary. Charles Koch really began, he obviously began his interest in politics and involvement in politics from a financial standpoint in the 1970s with the Libertarian Party. In the 1990s, he was advancing his organization, which was called Citizens for a Sound Economy. It's now been renamed Americans for Prosperity. And they were advancing this privatization agenda, continuing to advance it. And Charles Koch gave a lot of money to help George W. Bush become president in 2000. And he had influence over that administration. And he had hired, basically had taken on board this person, James Miller, not hired, but he had put him in charge of his organization, Citizens for a Sound Economy, on the board. And this person, James Miller, basically was in the Reagan administration, then was with Koch, and then came back into the Bush administration through the Board of Governors for the Postal Service. And so his person was put into this position to have influence at this time during the Bush administration, when the Bush administration was advancing this privatization, what I call scheme. But when they introduced the bill in 2006, they didn't say privatization except for one time. And it was in essence to acknowledge that the American people don't want the Postal Service privatized. But what they did was basically create what's known as a poison pill. So they used this Postal Accountability and Efficiency Act of 2006 to absorb that reserve, that nearly $20 billion in reserve, and also to saddle the Postal Service with nearly $5 billion of annual debt to pay for decades into the future of future retiree health benefits. No company in America or the world has an obligation to pay decades into the future of retiree health benefits. They pay them as they go. And so this was an effort to create either a
so sorry for interruption again, but so Charles Koch funded a politician, President W. Bush, and because of that funding, he has so much influence to one person who was working for him or with the same ideology, appointed as an entity which US Postal Service, which was part of the Libertarian, their manifesto that they want to abolish. When that person was appointed in that position, in hearings, did somebody bring out that the Libertarian want actually to dismantle this service? How come this person is being considered? What people were doing when appointment was being approved?
Well, that was an appointment that was handled by Senator Susan Collins of Maine. She was the chairperson of the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Senate. At the time then, as now, the Senate was led by Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell also backed James Miller, this man, to be on the Postal Board. And Mitch McConnell at the time was also working to undermine what was known as the McCain-Feingold Act, which were restrictions on the very sort of dark money that Charles Koch has become expert in spending. And so, you had people in key positions in the United States Senate who helped get James Miller onto the Board of Governors. Susan Collins asked him a question about privatization in the confirmation hearing, and he basically said he was going to stick to it unless anything changed in his mind. And she still carried him forward. She still helped him shepherd him through to the position on the Board of Governors. And so you have a situation where both from the inside the government and on the outside, Charles Koch had by that time staked a number of groups that were advancing the privatization of the Postal Service, including the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, which Charles Koch helped found, Citizens for a Sound Economy, and other groups, including Reason Magazine, which was one of the groups that he had staked initially in the 1970s. All these groups were clamoring and pressuring for privatization. So you have this sort of echo chamber in which his voice is amplified by the groups and individuals who he has helped fund or lift up, sort of clamoring for privatization. And when they created that fund that really put a throttle on the Postal Service, what it did was it was sort of win-win situation. Either they would create a big fund of cash of billions of dollars that would make the Postal Service more attractive for an initial public offering for sale, or it would sink the Postal Service and push it into bankruptcy, which would necessitate basically selling it off. And you can see that in essence from the report that was issued before that bill. There was a report in which the Postal Service political people talked about privatization more than 157 times. And they said that one of the obstacles to privatization was that the private sector was worried about this potential future liability of these sorts of benefits. So that's what that bill was designed to do. It was designed to weaken the Postal Service or make it, in essence, more attractive with this cash.
I want to still go back to the hearing in which that person was appointed. Is there any record of anyone, any senators from Republican side or the Democratic side doing enough research to bring up the question that this person is with Coach, Mr. Coach, who has a party manifesto to dismantle the Postal Service? So how a person is connected with that will do? Was the Libertarian Manifesto, any of the political agenda, any of the background was raised by any of the member of the committee?
No, and I think, one of the things that I've discovered, and that I think we've all discovered, is that Charles Koch was not well known at that time. He really wasn't well known until Jane Mayer wrote an article in the New Yorker magazine in 2010. He had had tremendous influence without having very much public recognition whatsoever of his role in staking these various special interest groups that were advancing this very outlier position of privatization. And so no one asked him about Charles Koch. And I don't think many people even knew who Charles Koch was at that time, other than people who he was funding.
So what about people saying that it is the act is called the Profitability and Accountability Act, that this entity was profitable? It has $20 billion in cash reserve and $1 billion surplus, not calling profit because it's a government entity, but $1 billion surplus out of its services. So why you're doing a profitability bill about an entity which is already quote unquote profitable, although it's a surplus revenue in the non-business terms? That question was not raised either.
Well, in terms of their public appeal, in essence, was efficiency. But a number of the postal unions had expressed concerns about James Miller, both when he was nominated within the Reagan administration and then subsequently. So the unions were opposed to him, had expressed opposition to him. But in terms of the members of Congress, I'm surprised that the chairperson of the committee could read the basic books, the basic financial books of the Postal Service, and have any belief that a postal service or any government agency could go from having, this net revenue, this surplus of $1 billion a year, to somehow absorbing paying nearly $5 billion a year in additional expenses. It's an extraordinary expense that I don't think any rational economist or accountant would see as possible. I don't think it's rational to believe that the Postal Service could absorb that, and that's one of the reasons why the Postal Service has this liability on its books. It's the accumulated liability. There was a pause in that payment for a period when the Democrats led the Senate. They put that payment requirement on hold, but it came back into effect in 2016, and that's why the Postal Service has this big debt on its liability.
Essentially, private sector Would you agree with the statement that the private sector conspired to bankrupt a federal government agency?
Well, I think that there are parts of the private sector that would love to have part of the business of the Postal Service. Maybe not all of it. They don't want the less profitable lines, the last mile service that the Postal Service provides to remote locations. But I think there clearly are businesses that might want to absorb it. And I think there are people who think that they could get very rich. If you think about how wealthy Jeff Bezos is from Amazon, Amazon has, not even a tenth of the amount of packages that the Postal Service handles. And he's now rapidly becoming, one of the richest men in the world, even in this financial crisis that is facing the globe. If you had 1 penny of every piece of mail or $1 of every package that the Postal Service handles, you would be the richest person in the world in a matter of probably weeks or months. And so because it does so much, in essence, business, because it has so much activity on behalf of the American people and people around the world who are sending packages and checks and letters to their loved ones, and businesses, as you say, who use the Postal Service for marketing, it's very attractive to the private sector to think that if they could get a piece of that pie, if they could get their hand in that till, I think that the greed of that has really helped sow the seeds of potentially destroying the Postal Service, in addition to these political ambitions by the current administration.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Lisa Graves about the Postal Service. It's a part of Americana. What is America without a postal service? But now it is on the butcher block because of politicians who are disliked by America, whether they are Republican or Democrats, while postal service is appreciated by 91% of the country. We'll be right back after these messages.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to over $600 million. 2 of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, a slow-burning genocide, on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tell of Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand with Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. So, Lisa Graves, you mentioning about Charles appointed, Charles Koch appointed, have this person employee, Mr. Miller, and he was then, because of his political contact, got appointed, and he stay. How long did he stay at the helm of Postal Service?
He was there for more than 10 years, and he was not directly employed by Charles Koch, but he was employed by groups that Charles Koch has funded. So, you know, there's this link. They can always have a little deniability about it. And he's been the longest serving member of the board of Charles Koch's political operation, which is now known as Americans for Prosperity. So he served until just a few years ago.
So was there any year during his stay there that Postal Service was profitable, meaning has generated surplus?
No, but it is the case that the Postal Service in some years was able to pay more on that debt. So it would have been profitable had it not had that nearly $5 billion worth of liability added onto it. It would have had a number of years of profitability. And in fact, before COVID, before this pandemic, the Postal Service, had it not had this liability, would have had a strong financial position, as the Institute for Policy Studies, IPS, has noted. And so the Postal Service is funded basically entirely by stamps and packages that it delivers, not by tax dollars. And so during this pandemic crisis, it requested funding, just like a lot of other entities in America. It requested $25 billion and up to $75 billion to help it with the reduction in business in the carrying of mail and packages. Even though people are relying on it a lot, its overall volume is down. But Congress refused to help it, in part because of efforts by Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, and by Steve Mnuchin and the Trump administration to limit it from getting that money that other businesses have received. Whole industries have received billions of dollars in the CARES Act. And we know from a recent report that there was a provision in one of those bills in the CARES Act that allows oil companies to do a carryback and get a refund for losing money this year but having profits in previous years. And so Marathon Oil is poised to receive nearly $1 billion in a refund in this crisis at the orchestration of the Senate majority. Meanwhile, the Senate majority has been blocking any effort to get the Postal Service a grant or taxpayer funding of $25 billion to help it survive and thrive.
So did Miller what is the composition? I mean, right now, are there some people in the Postal Service governing board which were left there by Miller, or the board? I mean, it's just amazing that the governing board itself is working against the institution they're supposed to govern.
Well, you know, what's really surprising is that, perhaps not surprising, but it should be surprising, is that Senator Mitch McConnell blocked almost all of the nominees of President Obama in his second term. So Miller was able to stay on in that position, but new people weren't allowed to join the Postal Commission, so that the Board of Governors, pardon me, and it didn't have a quorum for 5 years because of the obstruction of Senator Mitch McConnell. As soon as Trump became president, Senator McConnell began helping him fill this board, including with this man named Mike Duncan, who was part of the Senate leadership funding that helped raise nearly $100 million for Mitch McConnell to stay in power, to retain his majority. And so you have someone who is on the Board of Governors who's a Kentuckian, who's sort of a right-hand friend and ally of Mitch McConnell, who was almost immediately installed on this board, and he's now the chairman of the Board of Governors. He is someone who is extremely partisan and has been involved in funding Republican campaigns and trying to ensure Republican majorities. It's unfortunate that it's so partisan. I don't mean to speak in such partisan terms. The Postal Service Board of Governors shouldn't be partisan. Meanwhile, Louis DeJoy, who's the Postmaster General, who was chosen by this Trump-packed board, led by Mike Duncan, Mitch McConnell's buddy. Meanwhile, Louis DeJoy is also a major funder of the Republican Party, a major funder of Donald Trump. He's hosted fundraising parties for Trump in his home, raising nearly $2 million. He donated, Louis DeJoy donated to Donald Trump's campaigns more than $360,000 in the span of 5 weeks after this opening of a position to become the Postmaster General was announced. He also donated more than $400,000 to Mitch McConnell's campaign operations, and to senators from December until April of this year. And so in the span of a couple of months, the person who's now the Postmaster General donated more than $700,000 to Republicans as his quest to become the Postmaster General was basically underway and pending.
Wow, that's our democracy, Lisa.
Well, it is shocking, and it shouldn't be that way. This should be an independent board. It should be a bipartisan board. There are nominally.
I mean, there are boards of the U.S. government which are bipartisan, but not this one, I guess.
Well, there's a minority of Democratic members on that board that Trump put forward as packages, but he retains the majority of members on that board, including the majority that chose Mike Duncan, Mitch McConnell's ally, as the board chairman, who's the one who presided over the decision to choose Louis DeJoy to become the next Postmaster General, which has no term limit. There's no term of office for the Postmaster General. He serves in that role until he's removed or he resigns. And so you have a person who is chosen who has his own financial conflicts of interest. He has, as you pointed out, tens of millions of dollars of stock held in competitors of the Postal Service. And he's someone who has such close ties to Donald Trump that when Donald Trump chose 3 men to become the deputy finance chairman of the RNC, the Republican National Committee, he chose his fixer, Michael Cohen, he chose Louis DeJoy, and he chose another man who resigned in a scandal over some hush money. He chose 3 close friends, and Louis DeJoy was one of them.
And mainstream media, I mean, and there's a lot of focus on election and ballot, and your research has not found its right place in this conversation. So we're very thankful for your research and bringing that out. Now, President Trump is saying about elections and U.S. Post Office that, quote, I quote, they need that money in order to have the post office work so it can take all of these millions and millions of ballots. If they don't get those two items, that means you can't have universal mail-in voting because they are not equipped to have it. I mean, do you expect President Trump to be dishonest often?
He occasionally blurts out things that are his real agenda. In this instance, he made very clear that the administration, working with Mitch McConnell, has blocked efforts to fund the Postal Service to give it the $25 billion in COVID relief that it's requested, and it's also in the HEROES Act in the House, to stop that because he wants to undermine its ability to deliver ballots during this election. And that is an unprecedented statement by a president of the United States. It's an unprecedented effort to try to harm this public function, which, as you point out, goes back to the beginnings of American history. Ben Franklin was the first Postmaster General. The idea that any president would seek to harm or undermine or weaken the Postal Service, especially in the middle of a deadly pandemic, where more than 150,000 Americans have died and hundreds of thousands of people have died around the world. And
well, 170,000 now.
Yes.
Increasing.
Yes, in the United States alone, which and it's getting worse in essence every day in terms of the number of people who are affected and families who are affected by it. So people need to be able to vote by mail, especially if their health is compromised or they fall into categories that make them more at risk. And some states have been making efforts to try to make it easier for people to vote in this, once in a century deadly pandemic. But Trump has put his thumb on the scale to try to make it harder for Americans to vote, including to vote by mail. And his Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, has also been squeezing the Postal Service to even prevent it from getting access to a $10 billion line of credit to help it, and has exacted additional control over the Postal Service. And so you have extreme partisans in key positions, and this should not be a Democratic or Republican issue. It shouldn't be a conservative or progressive or independent issue. It should be a nonpartisan, transpartisan issue that we should have well-functioning mail delivery that serves us all, whether it's for ballots or whether it's for medicine or checks. That should not be politicized.
So the current announcement, which has been made by the Post Office General, that all the changes which he was doing will be put on hold until election. Have you read the detail of what they're saying? Does it satisfy that at least until election things will not be messed up further?
I don't think it does satisfy because it doesn't reverse the damage that's been done. During Louis DeJoy's tenure these last few weeks, he has presided over the removal of scores of postal sorting machines, some of which sort 36,000 pieces of mail an hour. So he's reduced the capacity of the Postal Service to be able to process the mail it's receiving, which is why so many people have been complaining about the delays in receiving medicines, life-saving medicines that they receive at low cost from the Veterans Administration or from other pharmacies, medicines that they rely on arriving on time. And that's because of these extraordinary efforts to make it harder for the Postal Service to do its job, to deliver all the mail on time and process it quickly. So until those issues aren't just stopped, but reversed, and there's verification that they've been reversed, that it's not just political rhetoric, we're not out of the woods in terms of the machinations of this Postmaster General and of Steve Mnuchin over at the Treasury Department on behalf of President Trump. And we also, I would say to you, face a risk by this president whose allies are preparing to litigate the results of this election and attack vote by mail. President Trump has made a number of false claims about fraud in vote by mail. They've been refuted by numerous fact-checking organizations. But what's happening is there are preparations on the Republican side of the aisle to try to sue to disqualify states or disqualify the counting in certain states where they have a vote by mail. And so they are prepared to try to contest this election, and I would say personally possibly steal this election, unless we do everything we can to ensure that we have a free and fair election in this country.
So what is the, I mean, I heard, I haven't read the detail of it. What is this lawsuit which 20 attorney generals from 20 states have filed?
There's a new set of litigation being pursued by attorneys general of the states. Those are people who are elected to defend the rights and laws of citizens in those states. And they are trying to defend the mail from this sort of disruption. There's also a lawsuit that's been filed by Common Cause and lawyers for civil rights groups and others that also is seeking to preserve the right of people to have their votes, receive their votes by mail and not have it disrupted by Louis DeJoy. And there's also an announcement by the New Jersey Attorney General, Mr. Pascrell, who said that he's impaneled a grand jury to investigate whether this Postmaster General is breaking the law in his activities. And there will be a hearing in the Senate, I think, this Friday, and then in the House on Monday to ask Mr. DeJoy Mr. DeJoy some questions. On Monday, it will be both Mr. DeJoy, the Postmaster General, and Mr. Duncan, the Board of Governors, the President of the Board of Governors, who's Mitch McConnell's right-hand man. They'll be appearing before the House of Representatives. And so there are ongoing investigations at the state and federal level into this unprecedented effort, in my view, to disrupt the delivery of mail, especially because the president has announced he doesn't want the mail to be fully funded because of the ballot.
Are these people who are doing the hearing, do they have your research in their hands?
I'm not sure. I hope that they do. I haven't lobbied them, but my research is publicly available, and I will be waiting to see if they ask about this, both the short-term issues in terms of the politicization of the Postal Service Board, how these people were put into these positions of power, including Ron Johnson is the chairman of the Senate committee that approved Mike Duncan for this position on the Board of Governors, despite his extraordinarily deep partisan history. And we'll see if they get asked the hard questions, because I don't think that they have. They've not been called under oath yet by anyone to answer these types of questions.
Well, we're almost out of time, but one short, small question is that, is it, I mean, this is a major institution. This is a #1 employer of the federal government, other than military services, probably, civilian. So what is the Democratic Party platform is saying? Do they understand the whole scheme was the proper word which we used? I mean, it's neither it could be considered a conspiracy, libertarian conspiracy against a public institution executed by their people, and it has not been investigated probably until you brought this report out. So where are the Democrats on this, the future of the Postal Service?
Well, I've seen a number of statements by Democrats condemning the actions of Louis DeJoy and calling for this investigation. I hope that they examine the role of Charles Koch, because after the Supreme Court issued that Citizens United decision in 2010, Charles Koch's influence over the Republican Party has only grown. He's spent and gathered to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in our elections over the past decade. And his group, Americans for Prosperity, has promised to have its biggest year in the election this year. And so he is continuing to exert pressure on Congress to basically cripple the Postal Service. His group even was running ads this summer against several US senators to try to block them, urge them, pressure them to not fund and help the Postal Service. And so I hope they understand that it's not just Louis DeJoy and Mike Duncan and Mitch McConnell, but it's also Charles Koch, who has really been squeezing these members of the Republican Party to advance his agenda, his wish list, to privatize this important public institution.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa Graves. Amazing work, and right when it was needed. So thank you so much. Your your research will help those who really want to understand what ails the post office and how ideology and money, which nobody can trace, can influence political hands to destroying something as American as as the post office. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. It was an honor to be on your show to talk about the Postal Service. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abdul Wahid, also for producing today's show. You're watching Galaxy 19 satellite from Muslim Network TV, also on Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Roku, and MuslimNetwork.tv, our website. We are always on these places 24/7. You will hear concern about our country, building bridges among neighbors, and understanding how to take our democracy forward and make it better. Peace. Salam.